11:45 to 12:15, and then from 12:15 to 12:30 will be questions and answers.
And at 12:31, you get to have lunch.
All right, good deal.
I know what it's like to stand between you and your lunch. Thank you for having us down here. My name is James Moore. I'm with Jacobs. I'm the project director on this team. Ned Byer is joining me, the project manager. And courtesy of modern technology, on the phone we have Dan Burden and Samantha Thomas, and they will show up magically on the screen through a series of little videos that we've integrated into our project. And they will be available for questions and answers as well. As mentioned, thank you for having us. The slide has advanced before. No worries. Go back one, please.
Arlene, do you have another remote mic for him, or are you okay? You can use the remote mic, or you can just talk right into that. Either one.
This one's not on. So
Oh, no, he's talking about this.
Okay.
No, I'm actually fine.
Okay. All right.
I think
very
we're good.
Just go ahead and pull that down if you
Yeah,
want
no,
me to. Okay.
he'll come up and present
Good.
when he's presenting.
Thank you very much.
Visioning process, it's pretty straightforward. We all do visioning pretty much every day, part of our lives. You know, where are we going to go on vacation, where are we going to go to school, where are we going to look for our job. But the reality is it also applies to the processes of running a community and planning and growing a city. A rather straightforward process. We have a team, we think, that has significant experience, including some significant world experience that we'll talk a little bit about. I would certainly argue that Dan Burden, one of our team members, is maybe the paramount visioning leader in this country working at this time. I know he's done a little bit of work here. Many of you may be familiar with him. But the idea is working through this process with the community, getting the community engaged, bringing in experts to help inform the process. That's how you end up with a world-class vision. And the opportunities are certainly here. We think we're the team to help you get there. You have a challenge, we'll help you meet it, and Bonita Springs will benefit from the whole process. A little bit of an overview. We'll introduce ourselves one at a time so you get a little bit more about us. Obviously, it's written up in the materials we supplied to you. Talk a little bit about our experience. It's quite extensive, as I've mentioned. Intensive, lots of experience in Florida, lots of experience in this part of Florida, but also experience throughout the country and really throughout the world. We'll talk a little bit about the relevance of this project to Bonita Springs. I understand there's been a lot of efforts over the last few years to really sort of figure out what to do with Bonita Beach Drive and how to make it better. And so we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about our process for working with you to take on this task. And as mentioned, we'll leave 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. Next one. I'm James Moore. I've been in Florida since 1988. I live up in Tampa. 88 to 2000, I taught at the University of South Florida in the School of Architecture. Teaching, particularly undergraduates, is really good experience if you want to get into visioning, because you have to learn how to work with people, work to help them, sort of bring them to a certain level, respond to their backgrounds, and really sort of it's an educational process. Visioning in many ways is about educating the entire community to what are the options, what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, and how do you move forward. I also spent a number of years at USF running the Florida Center for Community Design and Research, which is a small community design entity that did a lot of work with neighborhoods and state agencies. That's how I actually met Dan Burden back in the 1990s, when he was the voice crying in the wilderness with FDOT, arguing that pedestrians and bicyclists are also forms of mobility. I think many of you may have met him or heard of him back during that time. From 2000 to 2014, I was with a competitor firm doing a lot of work throughout the country, and I've been with Jacobs now for about 9 months since the end of last year, helping grow our planning and urban design practice globally. Just come back from 3 weeks in Australia, working on some projects there, where it's wintertime, actually. I'm going to let the first video run, and let Dan and Samantha introduce themselves.
Good morning. I'm Dan Vernon, and I'm Samantha Thomas. We're both with Blue Zones. I'll cover a little bit of my history first, and have Samantha do the same. So we're delighted to be part of the Jacobs team. I used to work for the Florida Department of Transportation as the first champion of change inside the agency to start to build roads again for people. And after 16 years there, I wanted to go national and have been doing that now for close to 20 years. And working on complete streets, walkability, all of the things that you have envisioned.
And I've been working with Dan for the last 4 years nationally, helping communities address streets and places for people through placemaking, walkability, more really age-friendly communities overall. And prior to that was doing community engagement and civic engagement with the city of St. Paul.
So we'll be back with you in a little bit, but we wanted to introduce ourselves first.
Yeah, good morning.
From Blue Zones, and good morning.
Hard to top that. Good morning. Dan Burden's on the phone, by the way. I don't know if we mentioned that. So my name's Ned Byer. I'm kind of the local face, I guess, with the project. I have 28 years of experience in Florida, mostly working for local government. So I've been on kind of your side of the table for a long time. As a staff person working for Hillsborough County in Tampa, I was their transportation manager. So we did everything from development review to capital improvement programming, board agenda items, board workshops, kind of soup to nuts. And then before that, I was working for an MPO. In fact, I met Dan Burden in 1989 when I was the bicycle pedestrian planner for Pinellas County MPO in Clearwater. And I was really fortunate. I ended up with the Pinellas Trail Project. I mean, who knew, right, when I was hired? But for about 5 years, that was kind of my life. And taking a concept to a linear park that was actually under construction within 5 years was one of the highlights of my career. I've been with Jacobs for about 5 years, a variety of work tasks, and I'll get into that more later in the presentation. Oh, this was my slide. Apologize for that. But one of the things I was going to mention, so I said I was kind of the local guy. So for the last 3 years, I've had a contract with the Lee MPO, general planning consultant. And we were fortunate enough to be assigned about a dozen projects from Don Scott and the MPO over the last 3 years. We are in the process of developing the 2040 long-range transportation plan for the MPO. We're about halfway through that process. It'll be finalized in December. We did something called a land use scenario project that was very visible, working with your staff and the board and others. We got a lot of accolades from that, actually, and we're using that data to develop the Lee MPO transportation plan. We led the successful Tiger Grant application. As you may remember, there was a $12 million federal Tiger Grant that came to fruition about 2.5 years ago. And we've done extensive bike ped work. We're going to be updating the Lee MPO bike ped master plan beginning next month. So because of this relationship, I've really gotten to know your community well. I don't think there's many MPO board meetings or committee meetings I've missed in the last 2.5 years. And so that's what I bring to the table as far as my background.
Now we're going to let Dan and Samantha present their experience.
So now that you've met us, I want to focus in on one project that we did that called for a lot of public process for complete streets. Woodward Avenue in Detroit, one of the most historic roads in America, has a 22-mile corridor, goes through 11 different communities, calls for all kinds of varied approaches, mapping out different blueprint processes for doing public engagement. We pulled that together, a very successful project. And now I'm going to turn to Samantha to talk about why this is so important, the visioning.
Well, the visioning comes at an ideal time for Bonita Springs and the larger region, as we at Blue Zones are supporting a larger community initiative in Southwest Florida called the Blue Zones Project. And that really elevates the need for complete streets because of successful implementation, and we're happy to be a part of this team.
And pump up the energy and bring a lot of collaboration and consensus.
Exactly.
Ever had a chance to work with Dan, you know that energy, certainly one of the things that he brings to the table. Some additional experience in visioning. I've done quite a bit of work with communities in and around the Tampa Bay area in particular. You can see some of them there: Dunedin, Clearwater Beach, St. Pete Beach, Treasure Island, Sarasota. These are communities that in many ways are not dissimilar to yours. Sometimes we're dealing with a corridor, sometimes we're dealing with a downtown, sometimes we're dealing with a particular district. But in the end, the visioning process is pretty similar as far as the process goes. Why do you do a vision? You do a vision because cities are always changing. You have a current condition and you're saying, here is a desired future condition. Let's talk through that. Let's decide what that should be. You know, that's often quite difficult. I think a lot of folks just think, well, cities are there. I mean, they simply have been there as long as I've been there. They'll continue to be there. But the reality is the cities change constantly. I've been looking through some of the statistics, and I think since in 1990, the city was about 5,400 people, if I remember correctly, and now you're almost 10 times that size. A lot of change has taken place, so it's almost as if you want to continually do visioning in order to prepare for that change. You know, desired future condition, what is it? Equally important, can we get consensus around it? It's not generally enough for one person to have a vision. In the case of a community, many people have to have that vision because you need to build support for it. Because what a vision will lay out is something that takes a long time to come to fruition. So you need to build the consensus. And then the additional, I mean, both of those issues, sort of what's the vision and can we agree on it, tend to be a little qualitative. But the reality is you have to have a vision that is supported by the facts on the ground. You know, what are the data? What are they telling us? In the case of the corridor, how many car trips are being taken? How many people are using it for different means? What are the land uses? What are the growth projections? So there's a combination of sort of the facts. This is what the facts are. This is what we think they might be. And then the consensus from the community. This is where we'd like to go in the future. So that's really, you know, part of the visioning process, regardless of whether it's a corridor or a downtown or a neighborhood or a particular district. That whole process is fairly straightforward. Can I have the, actually, if you see this one, you can see sort of the transformation. In this case, it was a dying retail center that was re-envisioned with the community as a mixed-use project that included a lot of residential and maybe a little bit less in the terms of retail. This is up in Dunedin, just outside of their downtown. Now, we're talking about a right-of-way here, about a 6-mile long stretch of publicly owned road, but the reality is that right-of-ways are the largest public spaces in every city. Somewhere between 35 and 50% of your community is public right-of-way. So they are very, very important. And I think a lot of people say, well, they're important because that's what the cars move through. That's how I can move around. Some people might say, well, yes, it's cars, but it's also bicyclists, it's pedestrians. But they think of them primarily as movement systems. But the reality is these corridors are also physical places. And in the best communities, the arterial roads, the roads that connect the community together, also serve as beautiful public places. They are special places. They are things that we take pride in. They're not simply functions. A lot of my experience has involved what we call placemaking. Again, whether it's a downtown or associated with, for example, a light rail station as part of projects that are adding transit infrastructure. You can see a range of the projects from around the country. Because even though, yes, this is about a piece of infrastructure, it's also about the physical presence of the community. If you come in off 75 heading to the beach, your experience of your community is this one road. And in many ways, we're saying let's try to make this the best place it can be, still addressing all the functional requirements that it has to address. Can I get the next one then? And then ultimately, any investment by a community should have positive economic repercussions. I mean, ultimately, development is also about economic development. And any plan you take should also be a plan that thinks about the economic vitality of the city. A lot of times that comes down to the land uses that are adjacent in the case of a corridor, the things that you see as you go by. Are they accessible? Are they the types of needs that people want? Are people heading out of the community to go to places because they're not finding those places within the community? So every design project corridor design project, physical urban design project, is also an economic development project. And we think of them that way. Even in the course of the visioning, we'll talk about what are some of the economic opportunities that may be associated with changes in the corridor over time. And again, you see some examples ranging from large regional projects. Pinellas by Design was really looking at the entire county. The county was built out. How do you begin to redevelop? And of course, one of the best areas for redevelopment in a county like Pinellas is along the major arterial roads, because those are the areas where people see the opportunities for change. Those are the areas that are most accessible. And those are also the areas that are not necessarily their neighborhoods, which are really places they'd like to see some stability as opposed to some change. So you get that working. I'm going to turn it back over to Ned at this point to talk a little bit more about specific experience the Jacobs team has within Florida.
So you may or may not have ever heard of Jacobs. I know before I was hired, they said that Jacobs is the largest company you've ever heard of that doesn't run Super Bowl commercials or anything like that. But we do have over 60,000 employees around the world. But I'll bring that to Florida. We have about 200 people in Florida. We have 20 planners on staff, and I work with a team of 13 people. So all that work we've been doing for Lee MPO and other MPOs and other local governments, I'm backed by a really good staff of 13 people, and that's certified planners. We've got a couple engineers. We've got people that are very good at documents and GIS. So some of Florida's experience as far as Jacobs, they're leading on the large scale, they're leading the design build effort for Interstate 4 through Orlando. Huge project. We had a major role in the Miami Tunnel in South Florida that was just recently opened last year. We also, in a multimodal transportation planning for Broward County, Fort Lauderdale, the WAVE streetcar. We're leading the extension of the streetcar. We're doing all the environmental analysis. They're trying to get federal money for that project, and so there's quite a process to follow through that. So those are some of the large projects. As I mentioned before, my nuts and bolts is county work, city work, MPO work, and so we're performing long-range transportation plans for different MPOs. We've done the Broward Long-Range Transportation Plan. We're doing the Lee MPO Transportation Plan right now. We're doing the Charlotte County Punta Gorda MPO Transportation Plan. That'll be done in a couple months. We've also done a lot of bike ped work. We did the Bike Pedestrian Master Plan for Sarasota, Manatee County last year. And being a bicyclist myself, I know several of our team members, that really resonates for us. There's a lot of different types of experience we bring, but I think for a complete streets type of project on a major transportation corridor, we kind of bring that ability to do the local planning work, but recognizing more the bigger picture, more the systems level analysis, because that's whatever you do on Bonita Beach Road is going to impact different road corridors throughout Lee County as far as the transportation. So we have to keep that in mind as we're planning those details on Bonita Beach Road. So with that, I have another slide. Thank you. Forward. No. This is it, thank you. I mentioned before, it's those relationships that we've built with District 1, your staff, the county staff, Dave Loveland and his staff, with the advocates in Lee County that will be very active, Bike Walk Lee and others that have real interest in what happens in Bonita Springs. I'm aware of City Council and your new directives the last 2 to 3 years. The discontinuation of the DOT PD&E study about a year ago. That was a real milestone. I was sitting there listening to the arguments on both sides. The adoption of the Complete Streets policy by the City Council, that showed a lot of foresight and ambition by the City Council. You've also had some initiatives for major landscaping on US Highway 41. And of course, probably what you're most proud about so far is just your redevelopment of old US 41 in Old Bonita. You've got an agenda item tomorrow on council. You're nearing the end of a design, and you're going to have construction underway before too long, and that commitment of those millions of dollars to actually construct those the roundabout and the other bicycle pedestrian improvements. So I think, to sum up, it's just that I have the local knowledge that I'll bring to our team, James, Dan, the rest of our team, to do this work. And then with that, I've got another slide here, and Dan, you're online. Dan Burden, I wanted to talk a little bit, and James mentioned the corridor, Bonita Beach corridor, being 6 miles in length. And, you know, traveling that corridor extensively, there's not one consistent typical cross-section. There's not one typical land use or design. A lot of that development was constructed in the 60s and 70s. You do have plenty of infill opportunities. You know, you generally have sidewalks. You have a bike lane on part of it, but you don't have a bike lane on part of it. And of course, it's your gateway from the interstate to the beach. And so I've been on a lot worse corridors in Florida, but I know you're seeking a higher standard, and you're aspiring to something that's not there right now. And I think together with James and Dan's help, and I know Dan has worked on projects similar on corridors. And Dan, are you still online? He apparently...
Dan, are you still on the line?
Yes, I'm having difficulty hearing, but I think I know how to respond to this question. The clarity is a little better. Thanks for letting us be part of the interview from afar. But what I do want to say is that what we are able to bring to the Jakes team is the ability to bring everyone together to reach that common ground, that vision, and that projects we've worked on in the past all require different typical sections in order to meet the full needs of walkability, bicycling, motoring, freight, everything. So a lot of what we'll be able to do is to bring that broader and bigger picture, and then bring it together for each element or part.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Dan. A little bit about the actual approach. We included that in the proposal we put together for you, building it around a series of workshops, one of them being actually a walking tour, not necessarily of the entire 6 miles of the corridor, but there are probably key locations that you can help us identify. And one of the things that Dan and his team do in a really spectacular way is walk the community around and point out key things that you might not really pick up, that you might not understand, that make the difference between a successful corridor and a place that's less successful. So, you know, starting with this idea of a walking tour, a guided walking tour of the actual corridor, where we can really begin to pick up some of the nuances of what works and what doesn't work, and that'll help inform the visioning process. And then following that up subsequently with an actual visioning workshop, a workshop that would be open to whomever you decide should be there. Obviously, the council, you are our client and a designated person from the city, but we also think there should be a steering committee representing perhaps large landowners or major businesses, people who have a direct investment in the corridor. And then there could be the larger community as a whole. As has been pointed out, this is the front door to most of your community. It's certainly the link between the interstate and the beach. This really belongs to the citizens of the entire community. How you would like us to work with the community, we will work to determine that. But I've had visioning workshops with 400 or 500 people in them. You get people engaged, you get people involved, you take their ideas very seriously, and you work with them. And this is an important process because the importance of the vision is that ultimately it underpins all your subsequent planning efforts. And perhaps it underpins the development of a change to your land development regulations or your zoning code. And the more people who are involved in the visioning process, the more they can say, yeah, I get it. I know why we're changing the code. I know why we're doing this plan, because 5 years ago, I was at that visioning, and I understand where we're going. And so it builds a political consensus or constituency for changes that may not come for 5 or 10 years. So the visioning is very, very, very important in that respect. Oops, sorry. Let's go back one. Just, I got it. That one forward. Thank you. Bringing people to the table. We'll work with you, obviously, to determine that. We've talked about using websites to get some people to the table. We'll have a range of meetings so people who work can come during times. The whole idea is to get as many opportunities in front of the community to participate in the process as actively as they choose. It really doesn't do any good to have 10 people say, here's the vision for the entire community of 50,000. We're not going to get 50,000 people, but the idea is to create a process that engages as many people as possible, and we'll work that out with you as we move through the process. Next. I'm going to go back to, yep. We have one more video of Dan and his team.
So this is the last time I get to speak with you. I wanted to focus a little bit on the walking audit, and one way we've become very successful at engaging people and learning from them. And it's a most dynamic process. We typically will do anywhere from 2 hours to 4 hours, depends on what the group's capable of time-wise. But boy, does it ever bring out ideas and start to build some consensus while still in the field. Samantha, why don't you talk about how we do it?
Yeah, by bringing together all the different stakeholders from the city, the county, the state, business leaders, community leaders, we're able to put our boots on the ground, on the physical corridor, take measurements, learn, explore, talk together to be able to become more in step with what our collective vision is that truly serves the many and not just the few.
Yep. And the big thing about walking audits is it helps people see their future, and it gives you that buy-in.
Right?
And there you see some pictures from Dan and his team and the community in Orlando in the downtown. Obviously, the vision is very, very high level, very big picture. You'll see a lot of things like the Post-it notes with, can we go back one, please? With the diagrams and the little notes to individuals. That's part of the visioning process. What you see on the right is the result of a visioning process many years later. And the question is, how do I get from these Post-it notes and these sort of abstract ideas to a really wonderful place? And we will talk about that, the whole implementation aspect of a vision. Many times people think, well, we have a vision, that's it, we're done. And maybe the rendering goes up on the wall or the document goes on the shelf or on the coffee table. But the reality is, it's not that difficult to imagine a scenario 20 years in the future. How could it be better? I mean, a lot of firms can do that, a lot of communities can do that. The hard part is saying, now that we have some understanding of where we'd like to be in 20 years, what do we do next week? What's the first step to getting there? And we talk about that as sort of a back casting, as going back from the 20-year vision to what needs to take place in the next 6 months, what needs to take place in the next year, so that incrementally you're working towards that vision along the way. And it's not just an abstract, here's the future, but it's almost a cookbook or a recipe for how do you get to the future. And that's the value of a true vision. The vision informs the plan, and then the plan ultimately informs all the activities that take place within the community. And that will be part of our process once we get through the public workshops. And with that, I think we have a series of visioning slides that Dan's mentioned from Detroit. You want to take over? 1 minute.
We have 1 minute, and we know we're going to have a question and answer period at this point in time, and Dan Burden's still online, so he can respond too. Hopefully he can hear us. So with
Okay.
that, our presentation's concluded. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you. And we'll see. Council, let's see. Who would like to go first? Janet, you got anything? Any questions?
I guess that my question would be is, in your projects that you've done, how do you address integrating in changes like medians and landscaping with the business owners that have concerns about how do they, how this is going to change how they work and the visibility of their businesses.
Right. I mean, obviously, the business owners are part of the community, the residents are part of the community. What we typically find is that by stepping back and saying sort of what are the general principles upon which we can agree? Almost every visioning will start by doing a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, because if you start by asking people what their positions are, you could find that they're over here and there's no way to bring them together. But if you take even a very diverse group and say, well, what are the strengths? Often they'll agree on most of them. What are the weaknesses? They'll agree on that. So the idea is not to create a situation where it's the business owner versus, say, the resident. It's to create a situation where you say, well, look, we have some consensus about some principles. Or we think beautification is important, but we're not insisting on landscape medians. You know, that sort of discussion, because obviously the business owner has a legitimate, they need access. Ned and I were talking about this. Access management is a big issue here. As you grow, as you continue to grow, it'll become a bigger issue. And that may come up as part of the vision so that we're even thinking 15 years into the future when the road may look very different than it does now. So it's always, I think, a question of saying stepping back to the points that we can agree on before we paint ourselves into positions that are very hard sometimes to move people from.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Let's see. Mike, you got anything?
Yeah, well, I guess first, who would be the contact person for the city? And second, when I was looking over the similar projects, I didn't really see anything that was real similar with Bonita. What would be your most similar project to what we want to do here?
Dan, did you hear that question?
Dan, did you hear the question?
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I'm having difficulty hearing. Could you repeat it now?
Yeah,
Yes.
we'll have him repeat it. Go ahead and real loud in the mic.
Who was going to be the contact person for the city? And then also, what would be your most comparable project that you've done already to the Bonita Beach Road corridor?
Dan, address the second first, and I'll let Ned address the first one. What's our most comparable project, do you think, or what's your most comparable project to what we have here?
You get that, Dan?
Yes, and I
yeah.
think a very good comparable project that we worked on is both High Ridge and Long Ridge in Stamford, Connecticut. We had 14 miles of corridor and held a series of 10 different workshops so that we could represent each of the neighborhoods, and we were able to come up with a way to craft the right elements and vision for each neighborhood as we did the entire project. It came off very well, but it did require that level of effort of taking walks with, and then doing the focus groups and the evening meetings with as many as 10 different groups.
And who would the lead person, the contact person for the city be?
Dan, I can answer that.
Yes. In this case, it was a very high-level project, so it was the Public Works Director for the city of Stamford, Connecticut.
Oh,
Yeah, to respond to your question, I'll be the day-to-day contact person. I'm here very frequently, really weekly down here, and our team, I'm backed by a big team. But James will be very much involved, as you can see from the time allocation and the number of hours that both Dan and James are going to be spending on this project. And just real quickly to respond to the first question, or the second question about projects. You know, our team has completed an alternative analysis project in Pinellas County, which looked at transit options, which had a high number of different groups that we were facilitating with, both, you know, economic development groups. We had combined local government, city government staff, and business leaders. That we had a series of workshops, and we also, that was part of the visioning of station development around a 23-mile light rail line connecting St. Petersburg and Clearwater. And that work was just completed a year ago. It led to a referendum that was, unfortunately, did not proceed, but they haven't given up. There's going to be a plan B. And so that's probably the closest work to this, because it's talking and communicating to people and ideas and getting consensus among different types of capital projects that go into a site, and land use changes and so forth, and possible code changes, possible capital improvements or changes to a land use map. So that was probably the best example that our team has worked nearby on.
okay, good. Steve, do you have anything?
Just real quickly, I've been on 12th and Telegraph in Detroit, and obviously they had some opportunities that we don't have, but they also had some issues that we don't have. How, in terms of the original cost estimate that you had for that project, how did it come in at the end? Were you close?
That's a question for Dan.
Ah.
That's Dan's project. Can you,
Uh,
the 12th and Telegraph project in Detroit?
Dan, the Telegraph project in Detroit, did that come in on price or on budget?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the last of the question? It broke up a little bit.
Did it come in on price? Yeah.
Yeah, so far as the budgeted price, did the project come in on schedule and the amount of money that was budgeted for it? Was it over budget or under budget?
The visioning part came in right on budget. We had a very specific task and challenge. The actual build projects are going to take over 20 years, but we had a very tight timeline to deliver all of the visioning, and we were able to deliver that right on time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? You got a project? Yeah, Pete.
Just wanted to ask here, I've asked this of all groups coming in, nice presentation. For one man's vision here, sitting here, that wants to move cars from the highway to the beach and move cars from the beach to the highway, wants to create bike lanes, independent bike lanes, not just kind of the breakdown lane for bicycles and for walkers and joggers and rollerbladers and everybody else. How do you move the traffic while creating the sidewalks for the bicycles and what have you, and the walkers and the joggers, and encourage and move that traffic from one end of town to the next, but have that traffic stop and shop and interact with the bikers and the walkers? How do you do that?
So this is a long-range transportation planning question, because we're dealing that right now with the MPO on their 2040 plan. We're working with the Department of Transportation on the transportation model, which forecasts traffic on not just that corridor, but all of the corridors within Lee County and actually within District 1. So the population employment forecast, that all matters. It tells you what those traffic conditions will be in the future. Tough situation, and we're facing it not only on Bonita Springs Road, but also a number of corridors within Lee County, US 41, a lot of the east-west roads. There's a number of constrained roads, and I would say that by policy, you do have a constrained road now on Bonita Beach, because the council has said we don't want to go to 6 lanes on this end of the roadway. It's going to take, number one, you're going to have to live with more traffic, and I would say that's the community to an extent, but you can make it look a lot better, you can make it a lot safer, and you can make it more multimodal with much better designed bicycle facilities and walking facilities. And there are champions of transit in this community and bus transit, and try to make some headway on that. I know the idea of more bus service out to Fort Myers Beach has been talked about. We led a project on Fort Myers Beach on San Carlos Parkway with stakeholders. They're facing some of the same traffic safety problems that you are. You look at the parallel corridors that you have. You don't have a whole lot going to east-west without making those so large and maybe too many lanes. So it's very difficult, actually. And so it's a real balancing act. So I think the short-term answer is you're going to have to live with a little bit more traffic, but you can make it look and work a whole lot better, and especially for bicyclists and pedestrians. And then some of those long-term land use changes, by filling in those vacant properties, there's lots of redevelopment properties up and along that corridor to make it more, walkable communities, people driving less. I think that was one of the takeaways with the Lee MPO work. The land use scenario project was long-term, there's got to be some land use development changes in this county, more inward development, less outward development, that will lead to some, better transportation. Kind of a long-winded answer, but it is a really complicated
Thank you.
answer.
Thank you very much. Bill, do you have anything for us?
No.
Okay, anyone else? Jen? You've worked with the county and the state and the MPO a lot, and you've got an idea what their priorities as they exist right now are and what it's like to work with them, and you know that this road that we're talking about, doing the visioning process and creating this really nice document, doesn't belong to us, right? Okay, so knowing that and knowing the realities of the kind of ground truthing in this situation, we're going to have to get their buy-in, they're going to have to get their input, we're going to have to get their cooperation if we're willing to implement whatever plan that we come up with. So the question being, when do you get that? When do you get their buy-in? When do you get their cooperation? And how?
Well, I don't think you get your buy-in immediately necessarily, but you get their cooperation immediately and bringing them to the table very early in the process. And you know, your staff, your city manager, they probably already have. And I think, you know, they've been paying attention. I think DOT pays attention to this. You know, Carmen Monroe's left, but Laura Lockwood is replacing her. Billy Hadaway certainly involves himself with the committees and goes to the board meetings. It's a continual effort. And, you know, my takeaway from reading your scope and some of the background data about this project, I think your city manager, in response to you all, wants a team, wants a kind of a quarterback to kind of proceed on the not just the visioning part of this, but in a year or at some point in time, there's going to be more detailed planning. There might be some follow-up implementation. There might be, you know, certain projects along that corridor that you want some CIP projects maybe, or something that you can control working with the county. So I think that that's a real asset of our team, that I think that we can probably do that, you know, not to take away from the other teams, but I think we're probably better positioned than some of the other teams to do that because we've had so much of that the last 3 years. We've been here all the time. So to answer your question, and then just to effectively communicate that, especially with Lee County, you know, Dave Lovell and his staff, the Lee County Commission are going to be really important in this project and, you know, proceeding here.
Yeah, because it would be really, I mean, this is going to be a great project if we can implement it.
Exactly. And, you know, you've done good things, I mean, on Old Bonita Road, right? And hasn't been easy, but you're proceeding, and, you know, it's real exciting. It's going to take some time. But I'm really confident about it. You know, Dan and James kind of lead the technical analysis part, and then we've got the boots on the ground to do more of the internal organizing and, you know, communicating and keeping people happy, and much what you do as council members.
And you would be wrong by thinking that, but thank you for the thought. Anybody else before we go? Hey, thank you very much. Nicely done, and we really appreciate your time and effort. And we're going to be going ahead and then doing today, Arlene. We're going to be at the end of the day. We're going to go ahead and make our rankings.
Correct.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, Dan.
enjoy your lunch.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan, for calling.
Appreciate it.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Yep. You did well.
Okay.
Arlene, how much time do we
So.
have?